last night, Vice President Kamala Harris spoke to undecided voters at a town hall. It was hosted in Pennsylvania by CNN. Anderson Cooper was the moderator. We'll get to this in a sec, but he had like a million follow-up questions about whether or not she supports the border wall, just to give you a sense of where the media...
Which is what all the undecideds are thinking about these days.
And fracking.
Can we just talk about how do we fill an auditorium of undecideds at this point in an election? Like,
it's amazing, and I listened to them after give their assessments. Two said that who were undecided they're going to vote for Harris out of this panel of 5 people, and I listened to them. I was like, can I glean anything from this? And it's like, no. These people make these undecided voters at this point in the game, they make their decisions based on things that like. It's difficult for us to understand because we're so plugged in. And if you're listening to this show, you're already exponentially more plugged in than anybody who would be undecided at this point in the race. For the most part, I mean, there are the people that are holding out their vote in protest of the genocide in Gaza. And that's a very specific policy orientation. But for like the general undecided voter who's invited to this kind of thing, I mean, what the Harris campaign is banking on is that they're basically moderate Republican leaning people. And I think that in terms of the bulk of the voters from a math perspective, they're probably right to target those folks. It doesn't lead to the best, I think, political campaign from our perspective. But on the substance, last night, she basically said we have to look at the filibuster to codify abortion protections. She also was asked how she'd be different from Biden, and she kind of just says, I'm not Biden, or my administration will be different.
Look at me.
Yeah. And it's just like, okay, we get it, but we need a little bit more than that. And she gave the exact same answer about Palestinian suffering as she had before, over and over again. It's the same memorized response, incredibly frustrating. But this part, in terms of like the positives, I actually thought she did a good job last night. This was a portion where she's asked by a town hall attendee about high grocery prices. And here she talks about price gouging, which I think they should lean into a little bit more.
To Eric Swenson. He runs a service desk for an IT company in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania. He's registered as a libertarian, describes himself as an independent. He says he's undecided. Eric?
Thank you, Anderson. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Eric.
So my question is concerning groceries. Grocery prices have gone up quite a bit in the last 4 years. Yeah. And some people blame former President Trump. Some people blame President Biden. Who would you say is correct? And what would you do to bring prices down for Americans?
Thank you, Eric. And you're absolutely right. You know it. I know it. I think most Americans know it. Price of groceries is still too high. And we need to address it in a number of ways. One of my aspects of doing what we need to do to bring down the cost of living for working people and the middle class in America is to address the issue of grocery prices. Part of my background and how I come to it is probably a new approach grounded in a lot of my experiences as a former attorney general, where I took on price gouging. And part of my plan is to create a new approach that is the first time that we will have a national ban on price gouging, which is companies taking advantage of the desperation and need of the American consumer and jacking up prices without any consequence or accountability. So that is one way. But to your point, Eric, there are a number of issues that we need to address in terms of bringing down the cost of living. It includes what we need is a new approach that I bring to the issue of affordable housing, including, for example, rent. And again, I bring to it my experience, knowing what has been happening in terms of how corporations have been buying up blocks of property to diminish competition, and then rents get jacked up, and addressing that, both in terms of making sure that there is a consequence and accountability for that, but also investing in people's dreams of home ownership, knowing that for too long, frankly, both administrations and both parties, Democrats and Republicans, haven't done enough to deal with the issue of housing. Okay. And we need a new approach that includes working with the private sector. I say that as a devout public servant, working with the private sector to cut through the red tape, working with home builders, working with developers to create tax incentives so that we can create more housing supply and bring down the price.
Let me just ask you about price gouging. I looked at your plan. You talk about going after price gougers, and I'm quoting from the plan, on essential goods during emergencies or times of crisis. I get that. How does that help, though, someone like Eric with prices that for years the grocery prices just been high?
Well, first of all, Anderson, as you know, and obviously CNN has been covering extensively what has been happening in the state of Georgia, North Carolina, Florida. It's a real issue. I was Attorney General of California. I was the top law enforcement officer of the biggest state in the country. I took this issue on because it affects a lot of people. And I'm not going to apologize for the fact that we need to actually deal with accountability when these, not all, in fact, most don't, but when companies are taking advantage of the desperation and the need of the American people. We saw it actually during the pandemic as well, where because of supply chain issues, there was a reduction of supply, and then they would inflate the price of everyday necessities. Not to mention, by the way, again, Donald Trump should be here tonight to talk with you and answer your questions. He's not. He refused to come. But understand that part of his plan is to put in place a national sales tax of at least 20% on everyday goods and necessities. And that, by economist estimates, independent economists, would cost you as the American consumer and taxpayer an additional $4,000 a year.
So that was, I felt like, her strongest answer, especially when she said that both parties were responsible.
That was fascinating because she was cooking at that moment. And then when she said that, she said both administrations first. And I think that was a little bit too honest.
She's very measured. And this is the kind of thing where, I don't want to overplay this, but I actually, before I got sick, I was having a conversation with Olayemi on her podcast on Friday, which I guess it hasn't come out. Olayemi Olorin, I don't know if it's come out yet, but we were basically talking about the differences in how sometimes women have to present themselves in the public eye. And her and I were very much instinctively aligned on this, which was interesting. And her, as a woman of color, I think understands this as well. But Kamala Harris has less leeway than a male politician, especially a white male politician, in the way that she disciplines her message. And you can see, when she gets all mealy-mouthed like that, it's this obvious self-consciousness, I think, about straying off message. So she can sound like she's memorized a lot of things at times. And I think that that is true. But it's also because she's being told, and you see her laugh less, be serious, wear dark colors, look presidential. I also think that's why they sidelined Walz. I don't think that was a good idea. But they wanted to put him in the way that, by the way, J.D. Vance has been sidelined, but I think that has more to do with his unfavorables. They sidelined Walz because they were like, okay, this is the point of the campaign where she has to look like commander-in-chief. And for what it's worth, I think they're doing their best in that regard. But I like that she mentioned both administrations and then she walked it back. And the fact of the matter is that 37 states across the country have individual laws on price gouging to prevent companies from doing this kind of thing during natural disasters. When Anderson Cooper follows that question up and he's like, well, we're talking about natural disasters. What does that have to do with the prices that this individual man, the registered libertarian, who, by the way, later was interviewed by CNN and said that he liked her answer about how she'd work with other people towards a solution, and then he was going to vote for her. He was one of the people who was swayed. It's like, work with other people. I thought you were a libertarian. Yeah. Anyway, but when she talks about price gouging in this way, federalizing this would make sense, because Anderson Cooper, dude, the disaster that we were talking about that led to the greedflation, which was called a leftist conspiracy theory for a while, which she actually articulated there. The disaster was COVID, and particular industries. Yes, as Harris mentioned, there were supply chain issues. There were backlogs and work stoppages because we have globalized our supply chain to such a degree.
And to capitalists, that is opportunity.
That it affected our economy. That's part of why the Biden administration rightly tried to onshore a lot of our manufacturing, and they've had success in that regard. And she would try to continue that policy. Cooper doesn't even subscribe to the idea that corporations artificially jacked up prices that led to inflation, taking advantage of the supply chain issues and elongating those higher prices so they could take home record profits. It's in the books. They took home record profits. So if it's still just naturally occurring inflation, in theory, that would affect the stock buybacks and the corporate money that goes to the executives, but it didn't. And so that's what Harris was articulating there. I just can't believe that one of the top paid anchors in the country doesn't recognize that, yes, it was greedflation that led to these increased prices and still does.
So he also like alluded to maybe even a pre-COVID type economy thing, and like, okay, Anderson, Vanderbilt, Cooper, like the broader long-term trend is wages haven't been rising.
Yeah.
Very briefly, we saw some wage growth, and everybody celebrates it like it's the new hallelujah. But that should be normal. That wages are growing because the economy is growing, and so like since the financial crisis, yeah, people's wages have stuck. So it does seem like if people's wages were growing, it wouldn't be such a big problem that grocery prices have been ticking up even pre-pandemic and stuff like that. Like, it's just a broader context that is just completely missing from like, is this Kamala Harris's fault, or what are you going to do about gougers? Like, can we have a memory that goes back to like that the economy was still an issue in 2016 and Bernie Sanders ran an insurgent campaign about how not great it was?
Well, I mean, okay, so you're asking for us to have a memory. I bring you this next question by Anderson Cooper because this part was just astounding to me. Remember when the entire media ecosystem laughed at Donald Trump saying that he wanted to build the wall and that Mexico would pay for it? Well, now Anderson Cooper is very upset that Kamala Harris hasn't met Trump in the middle in this regard. This is where he followed up most in this town hall.
Compromise bill that you want to pass if you're elected. You said that's going to be a priority. It includes $650 million in funding for the border wall. That's something Republicans wanted. That was part of the compromise. Under Donald Trump, you criticized the wall more than 50 times. You called it stupid, useless, and a medieval vanity project. Is a border wall stupid?
Well, let's talk about Donald Trump and that border wall. So remember, Donald Trump said Mexico would pay for it? Come on, they didn't. How much of that wall did he build? I think the last number I saw was about 2%. And then when it came for time for him to do a photo op, you know where he did it? In the part of the wall that President Obama built.
But you're agreeing to a bill that would earmark $650 million to continue building that wall.
I pledge that I am going to bring forward that bipartisan bill to further strengthen and secure our border. Yes, I am. And I'm going to work across the aisle to pass a comprehensive bill that deals with a broken immigration system. I think Jackson's question, part of it was to acknowledge that America has always had migration, but there needs to be a legal process for it. People have to earn it. Ugh. And that's the point that I think is the most important point that can be made, which is we need a president who is grounded in common sense and practical outcomes. Like, let's just fix this thing. Let's just fix it. Why is there any ideological perspective on this? Let's just fix the problem.
To fix the problem, you're doing this compromise bill. It does call for $650 million that was earmarked under Trump to actually still go to build the wall.
I'm not afraid of good ideas where they occur.
So you don't think it's stupid anymore?
I think what he did and how he did it did not make much sense because he actually didn't do much of anything.
I mean, okay, so there's so much wrong there. First of all, the Anderson Cooper dude, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when this was considered a joke. And now it's like, oh, so you don't think it's stupid? You agree that we should be funding the border wall. I mean, yeah, that was a part of the compromise right-wing bill with the Republicans that Biden clearly thought that and correctly, that Trump would cave to his self-interest and say, hey, don't pass anything while Biden's president with the Senate GOP. Even though Langford had been working on it for a while, I don't want to notch him a win. And so now they're using this on the campaign trail without really saying anything much of substance on the issue of immigration at all. And that's the problem here, is that we've talked about this repeatedly on the show. When you cede all of the context of the conversation or the framing to the Republicans,
saying there's a problem,
this is what you get. Go from 2016, where anchors like Anderson Cooper were treating the border wall as the joke that it is, and Trump's claims about Mexico paying for it as the joke that it is, to the moment in 2024, nearly 10 years since he started running, where it's like, well, don't you agree with him? Can't you meet Donald Trump halfway? And you leave that oxygen when you don't say anything except we have to fix our broken immigration system and Republicans don't want to fix it. And we got to be tough and also have a pathway to citizenship. There's a reason that the graph for public perception on immigration has gone like this, and it's not in the Democrats' direction. And, you know, it's a global phenomenon. The right is better organized. I think the Steve Bannonites and the Viktor Orban worship was a real strategy for global right-wing campaigns, particularly in Europe and the United States. But that doesn't mean that the Democrats in particular, as a political party in this country, haven't midwifed this political problem for themselves. And so... I
mean, she's doing the exact same thing Bill Clinton did to Bob Dole. You search Bill Clinton, Bob Dole immigration commercials 1996, and it's the Bob Dole's saying he's super weak on all this stuff, and Bill Clinton being like, well, look at all these cops I hired for the border.
Right.
And it has just moved, and what he said is it's grant the premise that this is a police issue as opposed to a immigration processing issue.
Right.
And also let's not say destabilize, I don't know, Venezuela by causing a depression on its oil industry type of thing, and displace people. Like this is a much broader thing than building a goddamn wall. And that it's become the sort of like, well, but are you going to build it? It's bleak.
You see how the conversation has completely deteriorated, and all she would have to say is say, hey, you know, I believe in this country. Both my parents came here from different parts of the world, although that would remind folks about her being black and Indian, which she doesn't want to do. You don't even need to say that. The Statue of Liberty is a beacon of hope for this country. It says, bring us, you're tired, you're hungry, right?
You need to breathe free, yeah.
Right. And so you can invoke that and essentially say, yes, our immigration system is broken, but we have to work together with the other side to make sure that people are able to be safely processed and their asylum claims are able to go through a court system as opposed to people constantly slipping under the cracks of our broken immigration system. And then you can do all your tough talk. But the real problem is not the brokenness of our immigration system is not that people are coming into this country. That's what America is in its most idealized version supposed to be about. We're supposed to be a nation of immigrants. I remember learning that in history class in high school or in middle school or whatever. That is a premise that you could invoke, and most Americans would understand that. And you could still do the tough talk. But just hitting Republicans on hypocrisy isn't enough, because then you just see it reflected in the media there. They basically now accepted the border wall as a legitimate premise of where to start the conversation, and that's a failure. And
I mean, we need to get to our guests, I know, but you know, Aaron Rieshland Melnick has pointed out that when you actually walk people through this thing and say like, well, this is what the deportations would lead to, or this is what actual sensible legal immigration, investing in making sure people employers can't abuse them for labor or whatever, people prefer that.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.